Hello everyone, this is Sam from Language Atlas, and in this video I'd like to show you the Spanish B1 Anki deck. We will handle three things. First, I will show you the course structure. Second, I will show you the course content, and I will do this by focusing on three decks so you can get a practical understanding as to what it is that you'll actually be doing when you get the Spanish B1 Anki deck. Third, I will show you some brief editing options. Please have a look at the timestamps in the description should you want to move around a bit. Now, before we get started, I'd like to just mention one thing. There are in fact two versions of the Spanish B1 Anki deck. You have the European Spanish version and the Latin American Spanish version. And the European Spanish version just refers to the Spanish that is spoken in Spain. When you get to the product page during the checkout process, you can actually see that there are the two versions, European Spanish and Latin American Spanish. You can just get whichever one you are studying. Now, having said that, let's begin. You can just click on whichever one you want to learn. I've already done so and I've opened them up here. I will begin with the European Spanish one for our course structure part, and then I'll go to the Latin American one. So let's get started with European Spanish B1. You can see that there's a deck called Card Types. I will ignore this for now, but I'll come back to it a bit later. Then you can see 8 chapters. I'll begin with chapter 1, pronouns. And you can see that you'll learn about how to position Spanish pronouns with conjugated verbs, how to use reciprocal verbs in Spanish, a bit more about how to use Spanish indirect and direct object pronouns together, how to use lo que, what, which, that, which, the thing, that. And again, a bit more about quién, for example, and how to say who, that, and which. Then we have adjectives and adverbs for chapter 2. You'll learn how to say certain or one of, any of, some of, how to say together, how to use past participles as adjectives in Spanish. Everything you need to know, essentially, for adjectives and adverbs for Spanish B1. Then we go to Spanish chapter 3 verbs. You can see that there are 3 tenses and a tense/mood, which is the subjunctive. So tense 1 is the past perfect tense, tense 2 is the future tense, tense 3 the conditional tense, and we have a tense mood, which is the subjunctive. And then we have a little bit more on verbs and time. So tense 1, past perfect tense, you will learn when you should use the past perfect tense, and then you will learn about the irregular verbs and the regular verbs of the past perfect tense. And we have the same concept over here. When do you use the future tense? And then you will learn about some irregular verbs, and then you have the regular verbs. Tense 3, conditional tense. And again, we have a little bit more on this. We have, I think this is interesting, when do you use the conditional tense? Saying would like, and then making if statements in Spanish with this. Now, making if statements isn't actually in the conditional tense. However, I did want it to be here because essentially you're making conditional statements even though you're not using conditional tense. That's why I put it here. I think it's very, very important that you know this little caveat. We have regular verbs, essentially is the same deal. Regular verbs, and then we have estar and ser, which are regular in that tense. We have irregular verbs, the same ones that you've seen before, how to use them. Think of poder and tener and venir. And then we have our first tense mood, which is subjunctive. When to use a subjunctive, a very important lesson. And then a little bit on regular verbs and subjunctive, regular AR verbs, ER verbs, and IR verbs. And then we have irregular verbs, the same ones that you've seen before, estar and ser, etc. Last part of this chapter, preterite versus imperfect. When do you use which and how? Chapter 4, idioms. Actions, events that started in the past and are ongoing in the present. You did something in the past, but the impact is still being felt now. It's still relevant now. How can you express time in Spanish with the beginning, the middle, and the end? Making requests and giving advice in Spanish with poder in the conditional tense. Saber versus conocer. And using menos to say except in Spanish. Chapter 5, articles and nouns. And then there's a simple one, using definite articles with nouns in Spanish. Sometimes it can be a little bit different than in English, hence this lesson is important. Chapter 6, questions and interrogatives. And we have certain words which are very similar, but they function just a little bit differently. Those are the ones you can see over here. And then how to ask certain questions with prepositions. The fact that you have to use que before certain nouns to say what which. Chapter 7, prepositions and conjunctions. We can see over here that there are certain lessons that really are important. For example, por versus para is one that gets mentioned a lot. In A2, you did an easier version of this. Now we're stepping it up a notch, actually. And again, some other things, some words which are very similar that you need to know how to say due to and because of. And chapter 8, negations. How to say neither nor and how to say never. This is it for the European Spanish one. This is it in terms of course structure. Now I'd like to show you the Latin American one. So the Latin American one, I'll maximize this. And essentially you see the same thing. This course structure of the Latin American one is the same as the European Spanish one. And now you may ask yourself, hey, what's the difference then? The difference is inside. So when you do an actual lesson, when you go to idioms and for example you do saber versus conocer, the sentences that you will see are different than the European Spanish one. One notable example that you probably already know of is that in Latin American deck you will see no sentences with vosotros. So good for you, it's a little bit easier. But yeah, so it's inside when you do the actual sentences that you can see the differences. And of course the audio and explanations, everything inside is different. So that is it for the course structure. I'd now like to move on to my second point, which is the course content, where I'll show you 3 decks. I'll show you 2 decks from the European Spanish version, and I'll show you 1 deck from the Latin American version. And this way you can have a practical understanding of what it is that you'll actually be doing. So let's get started with that. So I'll start by maximizing the European Spanish B1 Anki deck, and I'll get started with the first of the 3 decks that I'll show you. I will go to verbs, and I'll go to the subjunctive, and I think I like to do the regular AR verbs. I will go to study now, and you can see right away the following. You can see that there's a Spanish sentence, and there's a blank area. It's your job to know what goes inside this blank area. You can see here to buy, comprar. Then you can see that you have to conjugate it in the present subjunctive. You see the English translation of it, and you can see a picture over here so you can form a memory to set sentence. Do you think you know the answer? Let's see.
Ojalá mis padres compren esa casa en la playa.
Right away you can see that the answer is right over here. You can also see how to conjugate it. It ends with the EN. You have the English translation, and you can click on this or press the R key if you want to hear the pronunciation again.
Ojalá mis padres compren esa casa en la playa.
If you go down, you can see some explanation regarding this. You can see how to conjugate it. You can see the regular AR verbs conjugation method. So you can see actually, hey, how do I have to conjugate this? What's the logic behind it? And in our case, the ending was an EN, which you can see right over here. So this was the first question type. And a little bit below, you can see the link, of course, if you want to go to the website. So this was the first question type. You see a blank area, and you have to know what goes inside the blank area. I'd like to show you the second card type.
Espero si encuentro. Es un placer. Quizás. Espero.
And again, it's the same sentence, but now you have to type in the correct answer. So this is what happens when you type in the correct answer.
Ojalá mis padres compren esa casa en la playa.
You can see that it's been highlighted in green because everything has been typed in correctly. And again, one more time for another reference. But what if you made a mistake? What if you didn't know and you see a sentence and you're like, I don't really know what happens if I do this.
Espero que no despierte a los vecinos
it was a mistake.
Con esa música
this is what Anki shows you then. You can see over here what has been wrong has been highlighted in red. And you can see over here what it's supposed to be. And again, if you had it good, you would have selected good. You can do so by space or 3 or just clicking on it. In our case, we didn't have it correctly, but I'll just click on good again so we can go to the following one. Now I'd like to show you another card type, the third one, which is one that involves translation.
Es un... Quizás... Es... Ojalá mis padres compren esa casa en la
We
playa.
saw the sentence over here in Spanish, and we had to know the correct translation of it in English. So you see something in Spanish, and you have to know it in English. That's the third card type.
Espero... Si en... Es un... Quizás... Espero...
This is the fourth card type. You see something in English, but you have to know it in Spanish now.
Ojalá mis padres compren esa casa en la playa.
And again, all the explanation, everything else remains the same. So if you ever mess up or you don't know what's what anymore, you can just come here and check it. So this was the first deck that I wanted to show you. I'd now like to go to the second deck, something very important, I think. There are two ways to say to know in Spanish. In English, you only have one. So let's explore this deck and see what that's like. Again, you see a sentence, you see a blank area, and you have to know what goes there.
No los has conocido.
And you can see the correct answer. And then again, some explanation when to use saber. We have conocer over here. So if you're ever uncertain, you have a reference over here. Another example. Blank area. You have to know what goes there.
Yo no sé dónde has dejado tus llaves.
And you see over here saber is considered in a nutshell, which I think is really interesting. It just gives you, bam, a snapshot of what is right. Let's do one more. Blank area, you have to know what goes there. Now it's playing an instrument, a skill if you want. Do you know what goes there?
Yo no sé tocar el piano, aunque siempre he querido aprender.
It's saber. And essentially when you use skills, you can see it right over here as well. You will do it. When you know a skill, saber. But anyway, that's the deck that I wanted to show you. Now, I would like to show you one more deck, but then the Latin American decks, you can see a little bit of the difference between the European Spanish and Latin American Spanish. So I'll maximize the Latin American one. I'll go to prepositions and conjunctions, and then I'll click on por versus para, something that a lot of people struggle with, something that I think is very important to know. Study now. Essentially, again, same concept. Sentence, blank area, English, and then a picture.
Goya vendió su primer cuadro por un precio realmente
Now you
bajo.
may have heard that there's a difference. I'll click on this one more time.
Goya vendió su primer cuadro por un precio realmente bajo.
You may have noticed that the pronunciation is different. Now this is because the Spanish that is spoken in Spain is not spoken in Latin America. The way that things are pronounced are different. It's very important that this pronunciation has been added, because pronunciation is one of the most important things when you learn a new language. And with this deck, you have the right tools to improve your pronunciation. And again, as I mentioned before, you have all the ways in which you use either por or when you use para. So all the right information is mentioned. I'd like to do another one. Do you know the right one?
Ismael fue hasta París por autobús.
And again, it was por, and you had a different pronunciation than the other deck.
Ismael fue hasta París por autobús.
One more example. Blank area over here.
Acaba de llamar Juan. Dice que llegará para
This
la
time
cena.
it was para. So essentially, again, the differences are within the actual sentences. The noticeable difference that you may see right away is that in Latin America there's no vosotros. But choose whichever one you want, but stick with that one. So if you're interested in Spanish from Spain, do this one, or Latin America, then do this one. The real differences are inside the sentences, the audio, what you hear, and what you practice with. Now I'd like to get to the third point, which consists of me showing you some brief editing options. When I maximize the European Spanish deck, you can see that there's a subdeck called card types. You saw the same subdeck in the Latin American deck. But what is this? Why is this here? I'll show you. When we go to browse, we can see it right over here, card types. I'll just select the normal one. And essentially, I like to show you this. The way that you have been tested so far is that you see one sentence and that there are 4 ways that you will be tested. So you have the blank area, you need to know what to fill in. Then we have a field and you need to type in the correct answer. And then you see something in Spanish, you need to know it in English. And then finally you see something in English, you need to know it in Spanish. So 4 ways that you were tested. For a lot of people, this can be a bit too much. A lot of people actually don't prefer to translate. So those people can use the beginner-friendly option, where there's no translation and there's just a blank. You need to know what goes in the blank. And the second option is you see a blank field and you need to type in the correct answer. When you get to deck, by default, it will be like this. So there are just 2 ways in which you will be tested. And personally, I also prefer this. I'm not a big fan of translating. However, I do know that some people do like to translate. For those people, you have the normal option, so to say. But how do you change from one way to the other? Very simple. First, we have to move the card types out of the deck. Go to browse. And you move it out of the deck by just holding and going up. After that, you click on browse, and then you can either go to European Spanish or Latin American Spanish, whichever one you prefer. Control A, Command A, right mouse click, change note type, Language Atlas card to Language Atlas beginner friendly. OK. Yes. And you can see there are just 2 ways in which you'll be tested for every sentence. But what if you think, actually, I want to do it the other way with translating? That's fine. Same thing. Select, Control A, Command A. Go from that one to just the Language Atlas card. OK. And then you can see there are 4 ways in which you will be tested. So just do whatever you want. By default, it's in the beginner friendly one, and I actually recommend that for most people. Finally, I'd like to highlight one more thing. If you go to this icon over here and click on options, you can see an area over here, new cards per day. Essentially, you can change how many new cards you can see per day. You can increase it or decrease it to whatever you want. If you want to decrease it, you can go to 30, for example. You can go to reviews and you can increase or decrease reviews. So if you've done something before, you do it again later, that's a review. And you can see it has changed right now. My advice for you would be to begin with a low number and gradually move up. The reason I say this is because generally, if you give yourself a really high target in the beginning, perhaps you're not inclined to stick with it. The most important thing is that you build a habit. So start with a low number and then go up. Now, I think that's that for this lesson. I want to thank you so much for having watched. You can go to languageatlas.com for more information. I'll put all the links in the description. You can also see there where you can get the deck. I wish you the best of luck with learning Spanish. Please let me know if there are any questions. You can write a comment, write me an email. Thanks again, and I wish you a very good day. Goodbye.